Okay, welcome back. Let's continue our series of talks on Stoicism, where now we are going through the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. We have ended up in book 4, and I would like to talk about section 24. If you want to be happy, says Democritus, do little. End of quote. May it not be better to do what is necessary, what the reason of a naturally social being demands, and the way reason demands it done? This brings the happiness both of right action and of little action. Most of what we say and do is unnecessary. Remove the superfluity, and you will have more time and less bother. So in every case, one should prompt oneself, is this, or is it not, something necessary? And the removal of the unnecessary should apply not only to actions but to thoughts also. Then no redundant actions either will follow. This fits in with the theme in Marcus Aurelius' writings, and I think that that theme can be summarized, if we stick to Latin, may as well, given that he was a Roman emperor, as tempus fugit. Time flies, right? And I have always really liked this sentiment. There are many people who feel that it is very necessary to always talk, always have conversations, always be on, so to speak. But I think that there are a lot of situations where people say or do things that are not really necessary. And that extends to a lot of different situations. So a lot of contexts, or in a lot of contexts, we say things or do things that are not necessary and that are a waste of time. And of course you can argue what exactly a waste of time is. If you are doing something, I'm just gonna, this is a random example. You play a video game, and you play a video game for a long time. Then you could argue that that's a waste of time. You could do something very productive, like learn a new skill, or have a really good deep conversation with someone, or help someone out, or whatever. I am not harping on video games. It's fine if you play a video game. You could also argue that from a different perspective and say, yeah, but that is what relaxes me. Playing this game is actually what relaxes me, so playing this game is good for me, right? I had a colleague in Amsterdam who actually published a lot of work sort of under the motto of those things that are, he even wrote a book that had a title like that, the things that are bad for you are actually good for you. Because he said if you do those things that are traditionally considered bad for you, but you do them in moderation, then they're actually good for you because you enjoy them. And if you enjoy what you're doing, and that's a good thing for you because it reduces your stress. Now, I'm not sure if that's a sentiment Marcus Aurelius would share. Marcus Aurelius was a pretty austere guy, at least that's the impression he gives in his writings, whose mother even had to convince him to actually sleep in a proper bed, because once he started to get into philosophy as a teenager, he started to, I think, sleep on the floor or something. It was all pretty interesting, very, very Spartan. This is Sparta. Now, that was a slight sidetrack here, I'm sorry, but I think all that's is interesting things to think about. Once you start to be very careful about what you do and say, if you follow the path of Stoicism, then you may find that that has a positive impact on your life. For example, I'm sorry, I have to take a sip of water. For example, as we now know, I mean, if you've read about this stuff or if you've seen some of the other videos, something that is very important in Stoicism is virtue. Maybe it's the most important thing. Virtuous deeds. And a lot of things we do are not necessarily virtuous. And I've talked about that, I think, in the last video, one of the ones before that. So if you want to be a Stoic, then strictly speaking, you should, for everything you do, ask yourself, but is this a virtuous thing to do? If I'm going to send a gossipy email or text message or WhatsApp message or whatever, is that a virtuous thing to do? Answer, no. You know this. But once you, but a lot of, we do it anyway, right? If you truly want to be a Stoic, then you should stop yourself and you should say, no, I will not do that because it's not a virtuous thing. What is it going to give you beyond a few seconds or a few minutes of, sort of idle conversation, ha ha ha, funny, etc., and then it's over? Would you really gain something from that? You could also try to apply what Marcus says here, right? Most of what we say and do is unnecessary. Remove the superfluity and you will have more time and less bother. You do. If you pick your battles, and I mean that in every sense of the word or expression, if you pick your battles and you only do and say those things that are truly relevant, then that can be a good thing. It can free up time for other things. So here's something I was thinking about the other day. I like to read, but I was trying to remember what the last novel is I have read. And now I remember. I couldn't remember it yesterday. It was the novelization of The Last Jedi. So, yeah, now so that means that we are, I think we're talking December 2017. So that came out a little after the movie, so call that 2018. I honestly believe I haven't read any other novels, but then what have I been reading? Well, a lot of other texts. Some textbooks, which some I had to read for work, some I wanted to read to increase my knowledge a bit in certain fields, etc. But I have been reading a lot of non-fiction recently, including many books on Stoicism, but also other sort of related books, philosophy, etc. And I am not saying that there's anything wrong with reading a novel. A good novel is a fantastic thing to read. But for me, at some point, at this specific point in my life, I realized that I am simply not using my time to read novels. I want to have knowledge and I want to pursue knowledge. And I don't necessarily get that knowledge from novels. There are fantastic novels and some are very educational. Again, just like with video games, I'm not harping on novels, nor am I harping on reading novels. But that is a very deliberate choice I made. I want to read about this, and thus it shall be. That is a very deliberate choice, and that is a way I want to spend my time. I'm not saying I will never read a novel. This is also just an example, but it's an important example to me. Deliberation, cutting out those things that are unnecessary. And again, we do all kinds of unnecessary things. How many of us spend all night on the couch watching TV and not watching interesting documentaries, but watching stupid programs? I am not harping on sitting on the couch watching stupid programs. But if you do that day in, day out, is that the most productive use of your time? Because at some point, you're going to die. And the harsh truth, this is the way it is, right? At some point, your life's over. And to stick to Marcus's themes, that could be tomorrow, it could be 20 minutes from now, it could be 50 years from now. We don't know that. But if it is tomorrow, do you die thinking, well, I made the most out of my life? Or do you die thinking, I wish I hadn't spent the last 10 years of my life watching TV every single night and not doing anything else? I'm not criticizing. I'm just trying to raise a point here to make all of us think. Cut out those things that are not necessary. And what remains is time that you can use in a very productive manner. And that doesn't mean you should be working 15 hours a day. That's not what I'm saying. That's not healthy either. But I hope that you get my point. My point being, are you deliberate about how you spend your time? Because being a Stoic is doing that, being deliberate and also relaxing. Seneca wrote about that. You also have to unwind. You also have to relax. But everything is a balance, right? There should be a balance in everything you do. And that includes these kinds of things. So, for me, I really started to do what I said earlier. I started to think for every action I perform. Is this sensible? Is this virtuous? Is this something that will aid me? Is this something that will really yield something, that will give me something? Or am I just doing this mindlessly? And very often now, not always, because I'm human too, right? But very often now I think, you know what? I will not send this message. I will not do this. Because in the long run it won't give me anything. It's a pointless message to send. It's just making fun of something or whatever. It's not really worth it. It's not really necessary to do this right now. And again, I don't do it all the time. I have my quote-unquote weak moments too. This is to be human. Being deliberate, thinking about how you approach life, what you do in life, how you do it, with whom you do it, I think all those things are important. And all of that is part of being a Stoic. Being very, very deliberate. Weighing your words. Sometimes when someone says something, you don't have to respond. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to come up with a nonsensical thing to say simply because they talk to you. Sometimes there is nothing to say. It's an important realization, I think. And I think Marcus, that's kind of what he was getting at. And Democritus, I think, is a philosopher that really influenced him because he quotes Democritus a lot. If you want to be happy, do little. It's a good quote. Not do nothing, but do little. And I take that to mean do things deliberately. Don't do useless things, but do those things that are worthwhile. And if you only do things that are really worthwhile, actually worthwhile, you'll benefit in the long run. And there will be fewer things than if you were to do everything, half of which or whatever proportion is actually useless. It's an interesting thought. An interesting thing to think about, I think. All right. There we go. I hope this was useful. Let me know what you think. And I'll be back next week. Bye-bye.